SEP FanFic Readings presents Thanks to the Photographs by Unstable Hufflepuff. Chapter 15. Mother Knows Best. Hermione took a sort of vindictive pleasure in the fact that she was wearing her new jeans. The lip-curling once-over Narcissa Malfoy was currently giving her told her they had precisely the desired effect. Though even her muggle clothing could not hold Narcissa's attention, for she kept tilting her head slightly, attempting to peer around her at Teddy. It was obvious she had overheard their conversation, witnessed his metamorph magus abilities in action. She knew just who the little boy before her was. And she was a fool if she thought Hermione would let her say one word to him. "Miss Granger," Narcissa said at last, her tone cool and seemingly indifferent. "I was hoping to speak with my son. You see, he hasn't been returning any of my letters. I assume," she added after a small pause, her lips pursed in distaste, "that you might know where I could find him." As much as Hermione attempted to fight it, her face flushed at the implication. She thought quickly, wondering about what to do with Teddy. She didn't want him anywhere near her, and she doubted Andromeda would be all that pleased to learn he'd even been in the same room as her estranged younger sister. But Harry and Ginny were still down at Hagrid's, and she couldn't very well send him there on his own. Sighing, she said, "Sure," and then, unable to stop herself, "Though, if he hasn't responded to you, perhaps that's an indication as to whether or not he really wishes to see you." To her credit, Narcissa's expression did not change. She merely gestured for Hermione to lead the way. "Come along, Teddy," she said softly, directing him back up the marble staircase, even as he tried to get a better look at Narcissa. "This won't take but a moment, and then I'll take you back to Harry." "Hermione?" he whispered to her. "Who is that?" Hermione did not feel it was her right to be the one answering his question, but it seemed she had no other choice. She just hoped Harry and Andromeda would forgive her. "Did your grandmother ever tell you that she once had 2 sisters?" she asked, not bothering to keep her voice down. Narcissa followed close behind them in silence, listening carefully without a doubt. "Yeah, Granny said one of them hurt you really bad," said Teddy, placing his free hand over Hermione's forearm. "But Mrs. Weasley made her go away when she tried to hurt Ginny too." "Yes, she did. Did your grandmother tell you anything about the other one?" Teddy nodded his head. "Granny's baby sister married a very bad man and let bad things happen to people," he said. "But she wasn't crazy like the other one, and Granny says that makes it worse." Hermione was suddenly glad for Narcissa's eavesdropping. "Yes," she said with conviction, "that does make it worse. But Harry says that she saved him when my mummy and daddy died." "That's true, and we're all very grateful for that. But it's hard to forgive someone for their past when they never offer an apology." "Oh," Teddy frowned, then glanced quickly over his shoulder at Narcissa. "Is that her, then?" "Yes, it is. She's here to see her son, Draco. He works here." "Really?" "Mm-hmm. When you come to Hogwarts, Draco will be teaching you charms. He's a good man, Teddy, even if he's made mistakes in the past. I think you'll like him." "Did he apologize?" asked Teddy curiously. Hermione smiled proudly. "Yes, Teddy, he did." When they reached Draco's quarters on the 5th floor, Hermione stepped up to the portrait of an old wizard in a rocking chair and said, "Foul-mouthed falcons," and it instantly swung open to admit them. Behind her, Narcissa scoffed, and Hermione belatedly realized she wanted her, specifically, to lead the way for this exact reason. To see for herself that Hermione did, in fact, regularly visit her son's private living quarters. Draco was lounging on the sofa, still in his pajamas, with his hair ruffled from sleep, a stack of papers on his lap and a red inked quill in his hand. He glanced up at them and smirked. "Ah, Hermione, have Potter and Ginevra finally left?" He raised an eyebrow at Teddy. "Who's the kid?" "I'm Teddy," said Teddy brightly, "and you must be Draco." Draco sat up, his smirk transforming into a soft smile, and opened his mouth to reply, only to have the color drain from his face at the sight of his mother, standing by the doorway. "Mother," he said, swallowing, "what are you doing here?" Narcissa moved around Hermione and Teddy, avoiding everyone's gaze, and began looking around the room with a haughty expression. "You've been ignoring me, Draco," she said after a minute. "You should have known I would show up eventually." Draco shot Hermione a significant look, and she grimaced in sympathy, before carefully backing away, taking Teddy with her. "I'll see you later, Draco." "I'm sure you will," Narcissa muttered darkly. Draco gulped. Hermione hurriedly hoisted Teddy up into her arms, letting him sit on her hip, and hastened out the door and back through the portrait hole. Her heart was beating faster than it should have been, and her insides were twisting unpleasantly. She had only seen Narcissa 4 times in her life until this point. Once, at the Quidditch World Cup in the summer before her 4th year. No matter how vehement looks Draco had shot her from his mother's side, Narcissa had not spared her a glance and kept sniffing the air as though there was something foul in it. The second time was in Madame Mulkin's, before 6th year. She had threatened Harry and given Hermione the most contemptuous glance, stating that they were better off shopping at Twelfit and Tadding's, now that she knew the kind of scum that shopped there. Neither of these times compared to the third. She had attempted to get Draco to identify her when they were captured by the Snatchers while on the run and taken to Malfoy Manor, insisting that she was, indeed, the Granger girl. She then watched from the sidelines as Hermione was tortured by her older sister, and Hermione was quite sure the only thing that had bothered her about it was the filthy blood that wound up on her drawing-room floor. The 4th time was amidst the Battle of Hogwarts, standing beside her husband, and ushering Draco across the courtyard. Narcissa Malfoy was not someone Hermione had ever feared, but she remembered each of their interactions as though they had only happened yesterday. In her mind, Narcissa's only redeeming quality was that she loved her son. "Granny's sister doesn't seem very nice, Hermione," Teddy told her quietly as she carried him back down through the castle, ignoring any passing students in favor of getting him out as quickly as possible. "I don't think she likes us." "No, Teddy, she most certainly does not." By the time they had returned to the entrance hall, Hermione could no longer hold him. The last time she had seen him, he was not nearly this heavy. She set him down, taking his hand in hers, and hurried him outside and down to Hagrid's. The Potters were milling about beside the old wooden hut, Harry happily chatting with Hagrid, Albus in his arms, while Ginny supervised James as he explored the pumpkin patch. Every last one of Hagrid's prize vegetables was bigger than him. It only took one look at her face for Harry to realize something was amiss. "What happened?" he asked at once, his eyes darting over her and Teddy, as though checking for injuries. Old habits died hard. "Are you hurt, Teddy?" "We just bumped into Narcissa Malfoy," said Hermione breathlessly, and Harry's eyes widened. A meter away, Ginny snapped to attention. "She came to see Draco because he's been ignoring her ever since Rita Skeeter released that article." "Uh-oh," grumbled Hagrid, looking grim. "Fuck," breathed Harry, and Teddy gasped. Ginny glared at her husband. "F-U-C-K, Harry, it is not that hard," she snapped before turning to Hermione. "Did she speak to you? Did she recognize Teddy?" Hermione nodded fearfully. "I didn't see her at first," she said. "She saw him change his hair." "Granny's sister kept giving me funny looks," mumbled Teddy sullenly. He released her hand and scrambled over to hug Harry's leg, hiding his face in his hip. "I want to go home now, Harry." Harry placed a comforting hand on his head and nodded fervently. "Don't you worry, Teddy. We're leaving now." He glanced up at Hermione. "Are you okay? I doubt Narcissa is your biggest fan, especially now." Ginny snorted. "That's putting it lightly." "I wager she's giving Draco a piece of her mind right now," said Hermione with a grimace. "She had me lead her to his quarters, and I'm fairly certain it was just so she could see if I knew the password or not." "Oh, S-H-I-T. Do you want to come to our place for dinner? That way you don't chance running into her again." She shook her head. "No, I have a feeling Draco's going to be in quite the mood tonight. I want to check on him." As it turned out, Draco was in quite the mood indeed. "It's like she just don't listen," he swaying slightly on the spot as he stood in the middle of his quarters, a half-full bottle of fire whiskey in his hand. She just doesn't hear what I say, Granger. It goes in," he gestured wildly, "one ear and out the other." They had taken dinner in his quarters, because he didn't want to see anybody that night. When Hermione had gone to see him a couple of hours earlier, he had been sulking on the sofa, glaring out the window, his eyes unfocused and his arms crossed over his chest. "Thinking she knows what's good for me. Ha! Mother knows best my arse." "Come here, Draco," she sighed, setting down her glass of wine and patting the cushion next to her. He stumbled over, nearly tripping on the coffee table, and collapsed at her side, resting his head on her shoulder. She reached up and threaded her fingers through his hair. "I'm sorry. I wish there was something I could do to fix this. It was me Skeeter was after anyway. You just got caught in the crossfire. She's had a personal vendetta against me ever since I released her from the jar." Draco looked up at her with wide eyes. "You could always threaten her with the jar again." he said hopefully. Hermione shook her head. She registered herself as an animagus a few months after the Battle of Hogwarts, she said bitterly. Probably just so she could get away with speculating about my love life in the Prophet again. There's nothing I can do. They were both silent for a moment as she continued to card her fingers through his hair, and she tried to suppress the guilt rising from the pit of her stomach and weighing heavy on her chest. It was bad enough that Skeeter targeted her so frequently. She didn't want Draco getting dragged down with her. He was hated enough as it was. Suddenly he let out a low chuckle. I know something you could do, he said. She looked at him questioningly, and he had a mischievous glint in his gray eyes, even as he flashed her an innocent look. Say, you want to help make me feel better, Granger? He pouted. You know, get me out of this terrible, miserable mood. Hermione raised an eyebrow at him. I thought that's what I was already doing, she said apprehensively. Draco shrugged, trying and failing to suppress a smirk. You're not entirely succeeding. And who are you if not a perfectionist? She narrowed her eyes at him suspiciously, and he looked pointedly at her lips, his smirk only growing. Her breath hitched, but she said nothing. Clearly taking this as a good sign, he sat up, setting the bottle down on the coffee table, and gently grasped her jaw, angling her face towards him. Fuck it, she thought, and she let him kiss her. It wasn't as rushed or desperate as the last time, though perhaps a bit sloppy. His lips were soft against her own, and she could taste the fire whiskey on his breath, mingled with the wine on her tongue, sweet and spicy. Just as she was biting down on his lip, however, tugging it towards her, she felt a slight pressure on her head, urging her downwards. She immediately reared back. Oh, no, she said, annoyed. Be a good boy and use your words, Draco. He inhaled shakily at that, and she raised an eyebrow. You like that, don't you? Draco rolled his eyes, releasing her face and turning his head away from her. Piss off, Granger. Curious, Hermione grasped his jaw and forced him to look at her again. Come now, that wasn't very nice. I'm not judging. She leaned in then, her lips hovering over his without actually touching, testing the theory. She glanced up to find him watching her apprehensively. Don't you want to be a good boy for me, Draco? Fuck, he breathed. Hermione grinned triumphantly. She felt like giggling. Now use your words and tell me what you want. Draco took a deep breath, biting his lip, clearly hesitant. Why do I get the feeling you've wanted to shut me up that way for a long time? Draco chuckled. Let's just say this is a memory for the pensive. Hermione raised her eyebrows. If you're good, that won't be necessary, she said, slowly getting to her feet. She crawled onto his lap, straddling him, and his hands instantly went to her hips, dragging her closer. Because it'll happen again. As the week flew by, Draco had cheered immensely, but he refused to reveal just what his mother had said to him. He expressed his frustration repeatedly, got a dark look on his face whenever someone mentioned his parents, but still, no matter how many times Hermione asked, he would not tell her. She didn't mind too much. She knew, for the most part, what Narcissa had told him. He'd probably been reprimanded for befriending a Muggleborn, and Harry Potter's Muggleborn at that, something that always seemed to make the matter worse, for some reason. It also definitely did not help that everyone thought Hermione was some sort of promiscuous gold digger. He'd likely been warned against her. Whatever it was, Draco did not treat her any differently. Well, she thought sheepishly, turning over in bed to face him, their sweat-covered bodies tucked under the thin sheets. Perhaps that's not entirely true. She had, evidently, given up the illusion that sleeping with him would be a one-time thing. She'd spent Sunday night in his bed, then Monday night, because he was very persuasive, fucking Slytherin. Tuesday evening, while they were meant to be marking essays, she was bent over his desk in his office when he'd tired of her rants about poor grammar. On Wednesday after dinner she was in a foul mood, due to receiving another howler that she didn't disintegrate fast enough, and how he very gladly made her feel better by going down on her. Thursday night was spent in her bed, and last night they had taken an incredibly steamy shower together. It was now Saturday morning. They had woken up half an hour ago. Sunlight was creeping in through the window of her bedroom, and she had never had so much sex in such little time in her life. They didn't talk about it. Talking about it could ruin the precarious situation they had found themselves in. Honestly, it felt natural, relaxed. Hermione was at ease around him, and they took solace in each other's company. None of that was new. Their relationship was perfectly unproblematic. Here, in their little hideaway, there was no judgment, no expectations, and no one to answer to. She didn't want to risk ruining that. So, they didn't talk about it. They didn't cuddle either, not like an actual couple might, not like she once had with Ron. A night spent in one of their beds meant waking up in odd positions of tangled limbs that did not appear comfortable in the slightest. It meant Draco complaining about her hair and his face, and Hermione accidentally kneeing him in the back. It meant throwing their arms and legs in any direction they pleased and not caring if it bothered the other, or if it wound up tangled with sheets. Another thing they didn't talk about was their scars. Not the crudely carved slur on her arm from the wicked mind of Bellatrix Lestrange, the great purple gash on her abdomen from Anton Dolohov during the Department of the Battle of Mysteries, not the pale slashes on his chest from Harry's Sectum Sempra curse, and especially not the black snake and skull tattoo on his left forearm. "Pansy's having her birthday celebration next weekend," Draco said as he stretched. He yawned and turned on his side to face her. "You're invited, obviously." "Who else will be there?" she asked warily. "Because Pansy's friends from Hogwarts were not exactly big fans of me then, and I doubt they feel any better about me now." "Well, Daphne Greengrass for starters." "Your ex-sister-in-law?" "That would be the one." Hermione frowned. "Will Astoria be there?" He shook his head. "That would be horrendously awkward, seeing as how I haven't spoken to her since she moved out of the manor." She hummed. "Who else?" "Millicent Bulstrode, Tracy Davis and her boyfriend, Pansy's cousin Priscilla." Draco scrunched up his face at that. "Right piece of work, that one, let me tell you." "Is that all?" asked Hermione, bemused. "I would have expected Pansy to throw nothing short of a ball for her birthday. You know, lavish gowns, glittering jewels, house elves pattering around with hors d'oeuvres and expensive champagne." She trailed off and looked at him expectantly. He chuckled. "Don't get me wrong. It will still be something along those lines," he said, amused. "Just on a smaller scale. Not many of her acquaintances were very keen on attending." "How come?" He winced. "She warned them that you would be there, and if they had a problem with that, they shouldn't bother coming." Hermione blinked, taken aback. "That was very kind of her," she said after a moment, "though I'm sorry I've sullied her reputation." Draco waved his head as though slapping away a particularly irksome fly. "No, don't worry about that," he said dismissively. "It was already in the gutter. Half the wizarding world hates the lot of us for doing the wrong thing, and now the other half hates us for finally doing the right thing. It's not your fault, Granger." "It's not any of your fault either," she said. "I hope you know that." "I'm not so sure that's true, but thanks anyway." He gave her a weak smile, then stretched once more and sat up, running a hand through his sweaty hair. "I need a fucking shower." Hermione nodded in agreement, brushing away a curl that had gotten stuck to her forehead, and sat up, not bothering to hide herself under the sheets. It didn't matter. He'd seen it all already, and she knew he'd see it again. "Merlin, Granger, you have so much fucking hair," Draco grumbled 5 minutes later as he worked the shampoo into her hair. She reached up for the shower head and turned it so that it sprayed him in the face. "Ugh, what the fuck?" "Don't talk about my hair like that," she snapped, before redirecting the shower head to its original angle and turning to face him so she could rinse out her curls. "What, did I hurt its feelings?" "Yes," she said primly, as he began slathering his body with pear-scented soap. "Yes, you did." "My deepest apologies, Granger," he said mockingly. "I didn't realize your hair was sentient." "Well, now you know." He laughed, then nudged her aside to rinse himself off. She elbowed him in the ribs in retaliation, and he slapped her arse, laughing still, as she bent down to retrieve the bottle of conditioner. "Excuse you?" "Oh, I'm so sorry. My hand, it just—" Draco gave a one-armed shrug, smirking. "Slipped. Total accident." "I hate you," mumbled Hermione, shifting around him to get back under the water. He merely snorted and reached for the shampoo. "When is Pansy's party exactly?" "Friday night, 9 o'clock, North Manor. You'll need a dress, preferably something short. Ridiculously uncomfortable shoes that you'll complain about all night, but will make your legs look phenomenal." "A simple cushioning charm will fix the discomfort. Come on, Draco, you're the charms professor. You should know this." They switched spots so he could rinse. "How fancy a dress?" "Something you could wear dancing, but would be inappropriate at a garden party." "I've never been to a garden party, though I'm not the least bit surprised you have." Something too conservative for a lady of the night to wear, but that your mother would make a face at." Hermione winced slightly at that, but carried on as though nothing had happened. She had not spoken to Draco about what happened to her parents. It wasn't a topic she particularly enjoyed discussing, and dwelling on it would only ruin her good mood. "I think I've got something that'll work," she said with forced airiness. "Now, breakfast delivery from Creature, or are we braving the Great Hall today?" "Breakfast from Creature, obviously," said Draco. "I don't feel like dealing with Veronica's little remarks at the moment. Plus, he always makes those little pumpkin scones." "Fair enough," said Hermione. "She won't stop asking me if we're shagging. It's getting on my nerves." "Granger, we are shagging." "And you want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she was right all along?" She scoffed. "Some Slytherin you are." Draco looked at her for a moment, an unreadable expression on his face, before shaking his head in exasperation and flashing her a smirk. It looked a little forced.